and welcome to Maine Public's Your Vote 2nd District Candidate Conversation. I'm Jennifer Rooks. We're coming to you from the Studzinski Recital Hall on the campus of Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. Tonight, we have with us one of the 4 candidates in this race. With us today, Independent Tiffany Bond. The Republican incumbent in this race, Bruce Poliquin, indicated back in August that he would not take part in the debate. Democrat Jared Golden's campaign said that due to a scheduling conflict, he would not be able to attend this debate, which had been postponed from Sunday, October 28th. And shortly before this taping, independent candidate Will Hoare declined our invitation due to illness. So let's meet the candidate who is here for what will be a 30-minute conversation. Tiffany Bond is running as an independent. Bond lives in Portland and works as a family law attorney and mediator. She earned her law degree from the University of Maine. This is her first run for elected office. The questions in this conversation come from the Maine Public News team and from you, members of the public. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer.
So Tiffany, let's start. You've said that you have a passionate dislike for the Affordable Care Act, though you do not favor outright appeal. What are the most important elements of the ACA that you'd preserve, and what elements should be dropped?
Well, I think there's some good bits to the ACA, and I've read it when it was in a few different versions. So I read it when it was around 1,400 pages, and then when it ballooned over 2,000. So there's a ton of maintenance and housekeeping that needs to be done to that particular bill. I think that there's really important things. We need to continue to cover pre-existing conditions. We definitely need to make things as affordable as possible. And I think we need to give a path to government insurance for those who want it. So if I were to be able to make changes right now, I would allow people who are in the private sector businesses, small businesses, individuals, to be able to buy into Maine Care, which is Medicaid, and give them the ability for those who want it to be able to have that government insurance. And I think that would take a lot of tension off and let us really get back to retooling the actual bill itself. There are literally thousands of changes that need to be made within the text. And I think that they should be focused on, how do we expand coverage? How do we make sure that people who have coverage can use it? And that's what I fall into. I fall into that. I'm self-employed. I make just enough to pay for insurance that I cannot possibly afford to use. And that's a huge hole that's really hit our middle class, especially the self-employed, which there are a ton of in Maine, and I'd like to see us start targeting that. And then we also need to look at how we're reimbursing providers. I think that we need to be more generous with reimbursement, but not just more generous and put some sort of rubric in there where we compare it to services provided, but also measures of health and cost efficiency.
All right. Would you support a carbon tax as a way to address climate change, even if it would mean higher energy costs for Maine people?
So climate change to me is the single most important issue that we have. I don't make it my biggest issue. I make my biggest issue, why aren't we reading stuff we vote on? That's important. But if I were to pick an issue that is a traditional issue, it's going to be something that impacts all of us. Economically, it's going to impact us morally, it impacts us socially. So that needs to be something that is addressed in every piece of legislation we have where climate change touches it. And so I think a carbon tax is probably going to be part of the solutions. And there may be some short-term pains. The sooner we address it, the smaller those short-term pains will be, and the less severe the long-term issues will be. But we've been punting this ball for such a long time. And if we keep punting it, our children won't have a future. We have a moral and financial obligation to make sure that we are both mitigating and adapting to the way that our planet is changing.
You point to your hashtag Maine Rising campaign, which urges your supporters to spend money at local businesses or to give to charities or to help teachers. That is a job creation strategy. What would you do as governor to create jobs in Maine on a larger scale?
So the House is a little bit limited as to what can be done to do larger scale, but I think that I will if I'm elected, I'm going to be a candidate you'll never see do traditional fundraising. So Maine raising would just continue. Anybody who likes the way that I'm legislating in the state or out, I want them to keep donating to the district charities. I want them to keep shopping at District 2 shopping options, you know, the small businesses, people running out of their barn or having a regular retail storefront. We have great things to export in Maine, and I want the money focused on that. There has been millions of dollars put into this race. Over 18 million was the most recent figure I saw. If you can imagine that $18 million put into Maine raising instead of fundraising, we'd be in a much better spot. So I'd really like to see us focus on the community, focus on getting money out of politics and have that continue. As far as strategies themselves that could be legislated, you know, that's a campaign strategy, and that's me putting it's me walking the walk, essentially. What we can do, there are some limitations. I think we need to be really honest about what Congress does do and doesn't do. Congress has 3 main mechanisms to help. They can give the carrot, which is either tax incentives or funding. There's a stick, which is generally tax penalties, and there's outright prohibitions. When I think it comes to how we're going to work on the economy, I think there's a few things that aren't particularly partisan that we could make happen. So we could expand rural broadband. That's a great thing for us to work on, as well as other infrastructure. I think we do need some other infrastructure. I think we also have the ability to look at, you know, the plant is cannabis, but, you know, look at either medical marijuana and being able to do research and development in that. That's something that we can open up that would really help Maine's economy. Also, marijuana tourism. We have communities that would like to engage in that, and they should have the freedom to do so. I realize not every community is going to want to do that. As well as hemp fibers. There are mills that aren't working, although not all the candidates seem to agree which ones. And we could get those mills working again. It grows beautifully. It would grow very easily in Maine. And I think that textiles and fiber production, especially as we have more global uncertainty, there's an opportunity to get manufacturing going here again. So I'd really like to see us focus on those areas. I think there's a lot of long-term options too, but that's short-term.
You mentioned expanding rural broadband. Do you believe that the federal government ought to subsidize that as it did with rural electrification a couple generations ago?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, we have to make it commercially viable for there to be services provided. And I don't think we should treat it like a full utility where we have essentially a monopoly that's created. I think there should be some competition there. But as far as getting that last mile out, I think it's important. And obviously the market has not accomplished that to date.
You, by your own admission, are running a very different kind of campaign. You were just talking about that. Are you running to get elected, or are you running to raise issues that you think are important and not being addressed?
Both. So we have the blessing of ranked choice voting. And you know, there was a Gallup poll out that said 57% of us don't like the parties that we have. 57%. If 57% of people in the 2nd Congressional District said, you know what, I'm really Republican, or I'm really Democrat, or I kind of lean those ways, but I want to see money out of politics. I want to see somebody in Congress that spends their entire day job being a career politician, not what we think of as a career politician, but somebody who shows up on time, someone who's prepared, someone who works like their retirement depends on it. So if we have the opportunity to actually hire somebody for a job that's just not generally for sale, I think there's a lot of people that are into that. And if they all picked me as number 1, I win. We've changed politics. And if I don't get picked as number 1 by enough people, I'm happy to take number 2s. And if that still doesn't launch me in, I think that what's really happened is we've been able to have a productive conversation about what's wrong with politics, about what congressional candidates aren't doing.
All right. We're going to take a quick break, Tiffany, and then we're going to have some questions from the public.
Perfect.
Get out and vote Republican.
You've got to do more than retweet a hashtag. You've got to vote.
Across the country, candidates of both parties hit the trail to win voters' support.
Election Day is November 6th, and Maine Public's Your Vote 2018 online resource offers important information about the candidates and issues you will be voting on. Find profiles of all the candidates in the gubernatorial, 1st and 2nd District, and U.S. Senate races. There's information regarding the ballot questions, as well as links to interviews and news reports from Maine Calling and the Maine Public Radio News team. All of Maine Public's debates are available here with on-demand video or audio, and you can find the complete radio and television broadcast schedule. And on election night, check in for up-to-the-minute results from across the state. You want to be a well-informed voter and access reliable and thorough information. Maine Public is your source. Go to mainepublic.org/yourvote. And we're back with 2nd District Congressional candidate Tiffany Bond. We're having a one-on-one conversation with her because the other 3 candidates in the race, for a variety of reasons, are not here with us today. We're going to turn to questions that come from the public. Question 1 comes from Andrew Josephs in Thomaston. What specifically will you do to help find common ground to help heal our state and country?
Sure. Well, my day job is in family law, so I professionally work with people that can't stand each other. And very much the goal with those discussions, and I on top of being a family law attorney, I'm also a mediator, so I do a lot of my time in mediation, and it's not that different, right? You've got 2 people that really don't like each other, and we've got 2 parties that really don't like each other, and the goal is to get some way to work together and not screw up the kids too bad. And that's very much like Congress. We've got a couple of parties that have very strong opinions. Their goals really aren't that different. They use different language, they have different pathways to get there, but on most issues, there actually is a lot of alignment. And I think we're just missing somebody or a few somebodies in Congress that have the ability to go in and say, hey, you know what, we all want safety. We all want to have a border that functions. We all want health care we can use. We all want to be able to have a planet we can live on. These are all really important things that we all care about. So let's be flexible. And instead of saying it has to be my way or your way, let's use the flaws that you see in my way as a way to make that path better. And I think that's what's missing. With family law in particular, I think a lot of us that work in family law, we take conflict as an opportunity to make things better instead of an opportunity to yell. And I'd really like to bring that skill to Congress.
Question 2 comes from Harold Reed in Warren. I believe that all members of our legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government should be completely open about their finances so that the voters can see where conflicts of interest might occur. This openness absolutely includes publishing tax returns for all years. Do you agree? And will you support legislation to ensure this becomes the new standard for our elected officials?
I think it depends on the level. Certainly for president, I think that is imperative. Possibly for governor. I'm happy to fill out disclosures. There is some information that I would maybe not be comfortable with the general public having on a tax return, just because I do have a family and I filed jointly with my spouse and we have children. So I think that we should have maybe some sort of mechanism where they're audited by a nonpartisan board. That might be a really good way to provide privacy while still having disclosures. But you know, I'm also a pretty boring candidate. I think I have maybe like 3 shares of Expedia out there. So, and you know, my student loans might be very interesting to some people, but I think that we do have a lot of candidates that are very moneyed, and that's part of the problem with having money in Congress.
All right, our question 3 is from Elizabeth Schote in Albany Township. I have only heard the 2nd District candidates talk about domestic policies. What about foreign policy and U.S. aggression around the world? Currently, we are fighting or supporting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and Niger. How about not making any more war?
Well, I'm a big fan of not making war, and one of the things that I've really noticed that's missing in this congressional race is there is an almost absolute absence of talking about any current events. And I feel like I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, you know, we need to be having these hard conversations, whether it's about international relations or how we handle immigration or how we handle a wide range of issues. We do have a very large international presence, and that is not likely to change. But we should not be in the business of creating wars that we don't need to be in. And right now we're doing that, and that's a problem. Congress has been somewhat deficient in scaling that back, and Congress is that check. And it's not something that's just Republican or Democrat, it's happened on both watches. Congress needs to step up their game and make sure that we aren't in wars that we shouldn't be in. There are times and places for us to be in them, but right now a lot of them aren't those times and aren't those places.
Would you support removing our troops from, say, Syria?
I don't think, we don't have a huge amount of troops in Syria. I certainly would support changing the role that they have there and potentially scaling down. I'm really devastated with the way that we're interacting in Yemen. Part of the problem is a lot of that is executive branch function, so there's some limitations on how that's there. I think that what we need to do is we really need to rewrite some of the laws that have gone through Congress that discuss how we get into war and how those procedures happen, and what does boots on ground mean, and we haven't really examined those in a very transparent way, and I think we need to.
All right. We have another question. This is from Karen Holmes in Cooper. Will you support the current bill in the House of Representatives to reform the windfall provision law? Too many retired Mainers lose some of their Social Security benefits. It is a law in 14 states and is unfair and inappropriate today.
I have not read that law, so I cannot answer that question, but I will make sure to take a note of it and I will answer that question on Twitter.
So if somebody loses some of their Social Security benefits, say they've had a private sector job and then they take a job as a teacher, right. Maybe not looking at the specific bill, but the concept that in many states those Social Security benefits are a limit. Someone has to choose. Do I take this teacher pension or do I take my Social Security benefits? Do you believe that that's a fair way to go?
No, I've never thought that was fair. I just haven't looked at the bill specifics. So when somebody says, will you support a bill? Yeah. My answer is always, if I haven't read the text, let me read the text. As a general concept, absolutely, I think that that system is not fair and not compelling, particularly given teacher turnover and teacher pay. And I have always thought that that was inappropriate. I just don't know if the bill that is there is the right remedy.
Gotcha. Question 5 from Emmanuel Pariser in Hinckley. The National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and District of Columbia. Maine has passed this bill in at least one of its houses. Will you stand towards passing this bill to make sure that a president must be elected by a majority of the electorate? Basically, a question about popular vote versus the Electoral College.
I do not care for the Electoral College. I think that it was a good mechanism at the time. I don't think it is a good mechanism anymore. I think a national popular vote is probably the right direction to head. We had some interesting questions about the Electoral College with this last election, and I think there was probably some intent to have it serve as a check, but that's not the way that we use it. So since we're not using it that way, maybe it shouldn't be there anymore.
All right. Bruce Killian in Calais asks, what would you do to encourage renewable energy?
So there's a variety of mechanisms that I talked about earlier, the carrot, the stick, and prohibition. I think that renewable energy is probably going to be a combination of the first two. I'd love to see us offer some better tax credits and maybe some actual funding to get renewable options available. I would love to see the federal options and the state options work together a little bit better. I'd like to see us pulling in more scientific data and more scientists and folks in the technology sector to support that. And I think it's going to be a combination. I think what we will see is there's probably some good solar opportunities, but there's some limitations to that too in Maine, since we do have snow an awful lot of the year, and not all solar technologies work beautifully when you have shortened days. I think there will probably be a component that is wind. I think there's probably going to be some components that we haven't come up with yet. There's been some really interesting technology, for example, around solar roadways. So I don't know which ones are going to be viable, but I'd like to see us be jumping towards the cutting edge of that instead of the trailing edge, which is where we kind of have been. Maine in particular has been working on technology, but has certainly not developed a reputation for being on the cutting edge for those. So I'd like to see us work hand in hand with whoever the governor is to see if we can get some state and federal tax credits towards development for alternative energies.
Some people have advocated for bringing back a new and even more modern nuclear technology. How would you feel about nuclear energy?
Oh, you know, nuclear is hard for me. I have a brother who was overseas when Japan had those issues. He was in Japan. And so watching the devastation that can occur from nuclear, we need to be incredibly careful in how we harness those technologies. I think that we should continue to do research and development, but I am nervous for what Mother Nature might deliver us that could disrupt them.
All right. This is from Stan Tetaman in Poland. Would you please answer this question without making any reference to or demeaning comments about your opponents? What specifically would you do to lower healthcare costs?
Sure. I hinted at that a little bit earlier. I'd like to see us have a public option that could buy in. I think that if you were taking market rates and you were letting people buy in at similar market rates to Maine Care, which is Medicaid, you'd be able to expand coverage, you'd be able to start to decrease deductibles, and you'd be able to look at how we handled provider reimbursement, because the profit would be able to go to that, or most of the profit. There's still going to be some administration costs. And I think that's going to give us some of the competition that we need to help bring things down as far as costs. I also think we should be looking at how we handle prescription drugs. I think we should be looking at how we handle community clinics. I think we should be looking at a range of options for making sure that our rural communities are supported in a way that isn't a burden to those communities. So I think all of those things sort of fit together in a piece that will slowly start to bring them down. But there's a lot of very technical pieces that I'm happy to get to in another forum that can reduce costs as well. There's a lot of levels of administration in the ACA that if we cleared them out a little bit would also bring those costs down.
Tiffany Bond, if you're elected to Congress, what kind of congressperson would you be? What would people say about that Tiffany Bond, she, fill in the blank?
She is wonderfully boring. I want to be deliciously boring. I want to be the congressperson that goes through and reads bills, and I won't be able to broadcast every bill that I read. Nobody would want to read all of them, but periodically be reaching out and say, hey, this is a bill that I voted for, and here's what was good, and here's what was bad, and here's the detail. Here's a short answer, and click to expand, and you can have the line-by-line read of why I thought this bill was a good choice or a bad choice. That transparency is lacking in part because a lot of people don't take the time to read the bills. And how could they? If you are raising millions of dollars for each congressional election, for each $1 million per year you earn, it's if you worked 50 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, you have to earn at least $500 an hour to get $1 million without bathroom breaks or lunch breaks. So they'll say that I'm the person who's actually doing the day job. Right? I'm actually reading the bills. I'm actually making sure at least once a fiscal quarter there's some sort of opportunity to interact. I want to look at this as a Monday through Friday job where I come home every weekend, and if I can get home on Friday, I'd like to have office hours anytime I can. It should be a job, and we're not treating it like one. We have this very serious, very important job, and the job interview is a game show.
All right. Well, Tiffany Bond, you have an opportunity to make a closing statement as though this were a regular debate, and you have a minute to tell the voters why they ought to vote for you.
Sure. And is it that one right there? Great.
Yep.
Well, this is a great opportunity this year. This is the first year we have ranked choice voting. So if you've heard things you like, or if you want to do things a little different, if you're uncomfortable with all the partisanship, if you're uncomfortable with the way the parties are operating and all the conflict, this is a terrific way to have somebody who says, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to do all the things we hate about politics. I'm not doing the nasty ads. I'm not beating up the competition. I'm just here to say, let's treat this like a job, and let's make this a job interview. And if that works for you, put me as number one. And then rank the rest of the choices. I think that's really important to do. And if enough of us agree, if that 57% of us agree, then we get a congressperson who actually acts like they're supposed to. So take the leap of faith with me. Let's do it.
All right, well, Tiffany Bond, thank you so much for this half-hour interview for the job of Congresswoman for the 2nd District representing Maine. That is the final word. Thank you for joining us. If you missed any part of this program, you can see it in its entirety on demand at mainepublic.org/yourvote. For all of us here at Maine Public, I'm Jennifer Rooks. Thank you for joining us.